political leader. And I was impressed with how everyone just came around him. And I didn't really, I waited before I walked up to him to introduce myself. It was surreal. The reason it was surreal is because I spent the last several years studying the civil rights movement as an Africana Studies major, watching Eyes on the Prize and reading a wide variety of books and doing the due diligence about trying to understand the relationship between the older civil rights leaders and the young SNCC, and how, if any, I fit into that movement as a student leader. Then I became student body president of my college and a student government president in Atlanta. I was under the impression that I would go from student government president to managing the difficulties of homecoming and the Freaknik, and then I'll become either the city council member whose dad was well known, or I'll become the next congressman after John Lewis. I said, well, when he finishes, then I'll go and I'll be a member of Congress. I never thought that he would be in office at the time that he was. So I moved on from Atlanta. But before I moved on from Atlanta, after I got elected to student government president, I then interned in his office as a Congressional Black Caucus Foundation intern. And I used to call him the Reverend Congressman John Lewis. And I interned in his office and worked for him, and actually wrote my very first professional speech for Congressman Lewis. And it was an honor to write it for him. I spent 3 to 4 days researching and writing. I don't even recall what I wrote about, but I know it was inspirational. And he was going to deliver this speech to some summer interns from around the country who were at the Capitol. And so I poured all I could into my very first speech. And Chief of Staff at the time, before there was Michael Collins, was James Waller. And Congressman Lewis said, okay, we're about to go walk over with him over to deliver this speech. And James, he didn't have my speech. He hadn't read my speech that I wrote. And so James was like, Congressman, you're gonna read his speech, kind of read his speech. So he read my speech and he honored me, told me it was a good speech. And then when we got there, he went and he delivered, not my speech at all, but he delivered his standard speech, one that I probably heard a dozen times. And he talked about leadership, he talked about the civil rights movement, talked about sacrifice. He also talked about him preaching to some chickens in the chicken coop, where he learned how to preach. So I used to call him the Reverend Congressman or the Rev, because he was a preacher. Yeah, he used to preach to chickens in the chicken coop. But then there was a time in the same, and this is why he is so dear to me, because it reminds me about what it is to be a leader, and I have great respect for him. So I came up thinking that maybe the nonviolence movement was not what we were supposed to do, that we are in a different era, and now that we can be more aggressive in our approach to dealing with those who are violent against us. And so I started to lose some appreciation for the movement, for the civil rights movement, thinking that I'm not going to take it on the chin. But I learned a great lesson about courage. I learned a great lesson about leadership. I learned a great lesson about being of character from Mr. Lewis. He had gathered together the new elected members of the Congressional Black Caucus to his home on Capitol Hill, and I was there staffing it for him and some other people as well. And in his kitchen, the phone rings, and he goes to the kitchen to get the phone, and they say, it's the president. And so he picks up the phone, he says, hey, Mr. President. He talks to him. And the president at the time was Mr. Clinton. He had called him to get his leadership on a bill, crime bill, which years later we learned the crime bill was one of the most horrendous bills ever. It caused more damage to black people than, I don't know, man. I mean, I think it goes to chattel slavery here, Atlantic slave trade, and the crime bill over Jim Crow. The crime bill's been brutal towards us as black people. But at the time, we didn't know what the outcome was going to be, but Mr. Lewis knew this. He told the President of the United States, when he asked him, he told him no, he will not support the crime bill. I was like, whoa, this is the President of the United States calling on his home phone. Told him no. And he said, I can't support this crime bill because how unjust it is. See, Mr. Lewis was a man of character. He was a man of courage, and he was a leader. And that day on, he became my hero. He became my hero. He said then that how they administered the capital punishment was unfair towards black people. I heard him say it. And right then I knew this is a man of conviction, a man of courage, a man of leadership. He was a leader. Yeah, he became my hero that day. So every time I saw him, in DC, you get to see Mr. Lewis a lot, and in Atlanta, but definitely in DC. I just call him the Reverend Congressman John Lewis. Man, you mean so much to me. You mean so much to me. And I thank you. I thank you for showing me what a leader is. And I'll tell another story. What I really like about this one is every time someone visited his office, he would play a video of the Civil Rights Movement. He would play the video of the Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. He played the video for everybody that came in before they met with him. And I wondered, like, why? I asked, why? Mr. Lewis, why do you always play this video? And he was like, I never want people to forget what the cost was for freedom. What the cost was for freedom. We can never forget. I don't know how anybody of color, especially black people, could pass on voting. I mean, the price was too high that was paid. But that's Mr. Lewis. That's what he means to me. So I'm reminded why I lead. I'm reminded of my convictions. I'm reminded that until we're all free, none of us is free. And I thank Mr. Lewis for teaching me that. I honor you, sir. Thank you.